Today's guest argues that blaming employees for behaviors that drive you crazy is tantamount to what B.F. Skinner called blaming the rat. Skinner coined the term to describe the frustration he felt in the early days of his career when he would run experiment after experiment and his rats wouldn't do what he wanted. He recalled screaming at them one day, "Why don't you behave? Behave as you ought." And later on, he had a painful insight. His rats were behaving. He had been designing his experiments poorly, and his rats were responding rationally to a flawed reward system. Viewed through this lens, the bad news is that you are responsible for the dysfunctional behaviors that so bother you. But the good news is that if you're causing it, you can fix it. And today's book shows you how. It's a beautiful book from the Memo to the CEO series, and we're joined by the man who led the legendary leadership development centers in Croydonville for General Electric and Pine Street for Goldman Sachs, the author of, over my shoulder here, Ultimate Rewards, the Boundaryless Organization, the GE Workout, and the focus of today's book, this one, Reward Systems. Steve Kerr, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Steve, man, oh man, I really wanted to shine a light and get your work out there. It's years, it's decades since you wrote that famous article, one of the most cited of all times, The Folly of Rewarding A while hoping for B. And we're still doing it. It remains such a pervasive problem. For people who won't join us for the entire session, it happens sometimes. I see it on the YouTube stats that people zone out or they get distracted. In the book, you really focus on three main elements, a three-step process to help realign your reward system. And this is through the work you've done with GE. You did this with many, many companies, did this as a consultant. Let's share at a very top level, like a sentence on each, those three steps, because this is the elevator pitch. This is if you only had 5 minutes. You know, when you appear on CNN or something and you have a few minutes to give a pitch, what is it? And then we'll go deep into it for the rest of the show.
Where this stuff shows up most often is in the reward system. People behave the same way rats behave and hamsters behave. You go for the sugar cubes, you avoid the shock. Rewards are the focus because it shows up then, but rewards have to be the third thing you do. And your reward system cannot be stronger than your measurement system. In fact, people often are their own rewarder. And a lot of times you don't get in trouble with bad rewards, just people do the right thing. So measurement is the second thing. You got to measure behavior so you don't know who to reward, you don't know who to discipline or educate or invite. And measurement is second, but measurement itself has to be, what are you measuring? And even a place like Six Sigma, which are in the forefront, because you're not careful, you'll end up measuring the things that are easy to measure, which may not be the keys to success. So of course you can't reward the right things because you don't know what they are. And you're going to measure the right things if you haven't defined performance thoroughly. What are we defining as performance? How can we do it better? What are we measuring? How does it relate to what we define? What happens if you do these things and you're doing the right things? Now, what does the organization do? And you look like a genius and it's as basic as can be.
What I love, Steve, is that this is applicable to any size business. This is applicable even as a parent. How do you set up reward systems for your child to learn and to lead into learning, etc.? It's so useful for a wide range of things. So for those who love deep dives, we're going to go deep.
I always tell people whenever come, my job is to unimpress you. If I do my job, you're going to say 2 sentences and you'll prove that. And the first is going to be, I expected more than that. Or the second sentence is going to be, we could do that. That was always my goal.
I loved when you said that in the book. That was the whole idea. My job here is to unimpress you when you bring people into the companies. I'm going to tee you up here towards a great example you use right at the start of the book where you talk about the healthcare system. And a little quote for you just to get you warmed up. You said the basic principles behind a successful reward system are as well known as putting out the monthly payroll and doing it well. There's a huge competitive advantage to be had by doing it well. That sets you up for the first example you give us, which is the healthcare system as an example.
There are 2 things you can do wrong. Call a healthy person sick or you call a sick person healthy. In theory, they're both things to avoid. You call a healthy person sick. Now he's taking medicines he didn't need. He undergone deep with surgery, forego favorite activities. Obviously, you don't want to call a sick person well because the person and probably going to get worse because you failed to treat them. So that's where we begin. I'm not saying everything has only one cause, or I start by saying, okay, why would rational people be doing it? First, what's the irrational thing they're doing? So they've done many studies. These are updated frequently, and they look at the likelihood of type 1 or false positive or false negative type 2. And it's usually, and they compare hospital records, 26 to 1, 37 to 1, 14 to 1. It's not random mistakes. It turns out the first thing is they're much, much, much more likely to call a healthy person sick. A key cause is you will never get sued for the useless tests you do perform, but you may well get sued for the useless tests you failed to perform. So again, there's no villain. Maybe, you ought to do what's right. This isn't about bad guys and good guys. Why did they do this? They do it because it pays off. Or at least in their mind they do. Why else would they do it?
Well, it's a great analogy for what happens in innovation, Steve, where you'll go after the incremental, non-risky innovation rather than the stretch one that could pay back massively. And just to link it back to the medical example, you say, for example, because they're rewarded in a variety of ways for having high patient recovery rates, many hospitals prefer to admit relatively healthy patients, and some hospitals have achieved notoriety by turning away people who are desperately in need of care. Hospitals are also rewarded for admitting people who could be treated more efficiently as outpatients, running up the bills during their stay and delaying or expediting their discharge for economic rather than medical reasons. Again, reward systems.
That's exactly right. And again, these are not doctors who are stealing the money and going to Bermuda on vacation. These are not bad people. They got to pay the bills. You keep people longer. A lot of people get discharged on the day the insurance stops. In a way, they're being kind to their patient. They're not running up the bills, but they're saying, look, the government tosses out some money, and that's what they'll do. Your illness may require 3, but the insurance covers 7.
Feel free to link this back to your experiences with the various companies you worked with. You said that another problem is the hospitals aren't reimbursed at all for preventative care or get much less than they receive for treating existing symptoms. And I thought about how, well, that's the same in an organization that, say I'm the leader and I go, I'm going to invest to prevent some problem in the future. It's like cybersecurity. I invest in something in case it ever happens. And because you invest in it, it never happens. So as a result, I don't get credit or I don't get recognized for preventing something that could have happened. It's kind of like floods, the whole idea of investing in areas to prevent flooding. And that same reward, that is so broken. And I wondered, how do you fix that? So as a leader, I'm running a company and I need to put in place innovation systems that I build R&D, that I invest in the future. And these things may or may not work out. And they may work out after my tenure and I won't even get any of the credit for that.
There are a number of things you can do to address it. For example, the idea of stretch goals, it was Welch's idea. And what it did was it increased the penalty for not setting stretch goals because of what you said. On one hand, if I stay with what's true, we got a good quality control system and theirs will be low, it won't be noticeable because they are low. And so it was inadvertently rewarded, lack of innovation and so on. If sometimes doing it right means just the absence of being noticed. So now I'm sitting there and the people, they're not enjoying what happens to, they think, a low performance, but if quality in the area, that's where the money's going to go. So we had stretch goals. Jack said a stretch goal is a goal that you set and commit to without having any clear idea of how you would get there. Stretch simply means if you do a linear extrapolation for what you've been rewarding and what you've quality proof goal, you wouldn't get to this number. So they said, now this being G, you're forgiven. He says, hell no, but I'll know that the goal was high. I will reward stretch goals. Anyway, I know what you're doing. That the goal you set doesn't show stretch goal. That should worry you more when I find out than trying it failing. So we said one of the questions was, how are you doing on that metric compared to how you did last year? How are you doing compared to the rate of improvement you were getting year to year without it? So you never really ask the question, did you make your stretch goal? Because it's not a fair question.
We had Spen Smith, he wrote a book called Strategy Beyond the Hockey Stick. And he was talking about how people promise these goals, these stretch goals, but they never ever come in on target. just to get the resources. That's a big challenge of this, is that they do the board meeting, they present their strategy for 2025. They go, here's what I'm going to aim for, but they know they're never going to do it. But they promise that in order to get the resources, to get the funding, to get the people. And then they know, and it's almost like this game in the boardroom, that they know they're not going to achieve it, but they have to almost tell these porkies, these pork pies, in order to get it over the line. That's a huge problem with this.
It's a huge problem if you don't plan for it. There's things you do at the front end. You create a good reward system or a reward systems. You say, you can do this and maybe get away with it for a cycle or two, but we're not done. In the end, this is not in your best interest. Or you would have to make quarterly goals that you don't want to miss it. You really don't want to miss it. And the rewards for making was sometimes the absence of pain. Go for the quarterly review with Jack and how do you do on X? And he knew damn well how you did on X. So they're creating definitions that are going to save their butts every review time. So they start setting definitions that are self-serving. We have to meet our delivery schedules, but delivery meant left company property. So we're supposed to build these giant turbines, and we're late on some, any number of reasons. So on March 31, they get shipped. Where are they shipped? They're shipped to the loading dock. They're now on the train going nowhere because it's not yet ready. And our workers are now at the loading dock finishing what they have to do. It wasn't ready to leave, but we're not we never would give the customer bad product, but the point is less company property. So that's what the airlines do. The airlines have metric departing on time. They count the percentages. The percentage of flights that leave on time. On time meant they close the door, they went. Where are the planes? Some of them, they're on the tunnel. They're going nowhere. They're not ready to leave, but they left the gate. We're going to be a little while, folks. And if you don't realize what you're causing, it's not pretty when you encourage bad behavior, because you often get bad behavior.
I just wanted to show for people who didn't know what I was talking about, the idea of the hairy back, which is what Sven Smith talked about. So this is where you have the promise of, oh, this is what we're going to do in 2011. And the actual performance you can see is much less. And you create what he called a hairy back problem inside an organization. But I just wanted to share that. And then let's build on what you just said, because you give this really chilling example that flawed reward systems have also worked against national interests in times of war. And you give the example of World War II versus Vietnam. And this really brings it home.
What does the military want? You want to win the war, and that's very important. You win the war. And the war, if they have a soldier, I want to get home alive, preferably with all the legs and arms I came in with. It depends on the reward system. You're not going to reward people getting shot at. It's unpleasant. So you have drafts, and some of it's involuntary. I don't have any way around that. But the point is that in World War II, they want to win the war at the top, and the guys want to go home with the gals at the bottom. In Vietnam, the war was more controversial. So you could the flag, we're all doing this for the greater good. A lot of people were marching against the war in America anyway. So that 13-month tour of duty. So now, what does the country want? They want their bosses want to win. But in the World War II, you want to go home, you better win. Otherwise, stay on with some bad shit happen. In Vietnam, it was totally disconnected. The organization goal was separated from the individual goal. The terms that came out of Vietnam, search and evade, that they would translate, they would sarcastically use with the people. They would look for the enemy here. If they drowned, they would look for somewhere else. And the worst of it was fragging, which I guess was rowing every day. They'd get commanding officers while they slept. It's called murder. It's terrible. But it was not done randomly. These were people who were going to look good by boasting, going with them and sending people into crazy danger. No one's defending you. I'm not here to justify. I'm saying you're causing it. You're causing it. And if you don't like it, you shouldn't like it. You should stop it.
Steve mentioned this killing of your officer who was going to send you off to what you maybe thought was certain death. So you're trying to avoid this. You're going, it's in our better interest not to do that. Let's kill him. So they killed the officer in whatever way they would. And I thought, well, metaphorically, that happens inside organizations all the time, that a new leader comes in. She has all these ideas about change. She's going to restructure the organization. People are going to lose their status. They're going to change different elements. They're going to be working in different places. And they metaphorically frag the leader. So they kill the leader. by undermining them, by making it difficult, by frustrating them so they leave. And I wondered about what your thoughts were on that one.
It happens. And some people will do that. It may be personal. People enjoy making other people look. They promoted him out of Leo. They broke this person instead of promoting me. But they're going to show them what a bad decision it was. Who rewards are designed to change behavior, to create incentives. People change themselves because you don't say, why don't you do stuff that's not in your own best interest? You say, to do stuff in your own best interest is to help the organization. And I realize it doesn't look that way. At the end of the day, sometimes the old saw was that sometimes after you get done trying to change the people, you got to change the people. That means training, development, motivation, but sometimes selection. No, you can make the criteria fair. You can prepare people so that they know they had an opportunity. They even know if you're doing it right, that Ernie honestly believes that the new person is better than I would have been. If you do this stuff right, you make it as visible as you can. And that way they will know that the boss was trying to get it right. He wasn't doing this to hurt me. It just was the result of it. It doesn't make them pleasant. But then again, performance review is a whole other topic. The best way to do performance reviews, you can't do one a year and have it be good. You cannot, because you can't use the same thing for development and control. You got to separate them. And the spring is when you do development. And that means no hard copy goes to HR. No hard copy goes to your boss. You do peer review. The boss does a review of you. And the tone is, if I would have seen his behavior in December when it counts, I would have to dock you. You would lose a category, you'd lose pay. So fair notice, please. And we'll work with you if you need help. That's what, et cetera. That's what you do in the spring, and no hard copy to HR. You just say, if this behavior persisted in my mind, I would have to take off enough points. You're not going to be a GM someday. But if I'm right, you got 6 months to improve. And believe me, you hit the resources. You don't use traits. Traits can't be too short. You can't reach the top shelf. That's not helpful. But you put in terms that people could understand and act cool. And then you also, in December, well, I may be wrong. You have 6 months to prove me wrong. And now you know what I'm looking for. And by the way, the other thing, we come at the review people, no matter what, I've been a pro in my different jobs. When you come to the interview, one thing we're going to cover is you're going to tell me one thing. If I did it differently, it would help you do your job better. Everybody makes mistakes. I would tell them, I'm good for 2 mistakes a week. I wish I didn't do those 2. If I knew which 2, I wouldn't do those 2. And you make it safe, and they'll give you stuff about you that can really help you do a better job.
I have this process I call reverse onboarding, that anytime I work with someone new, I'll ask them after 6 weeks to present back to me, what am I not doing? What am I doing that's irritating, etc. Unfortunately, I said this to my wife, and she has no problem telling me all of the things I'm doing wrong. Steve, I have another one for you. So we talked about the fragging of the leader, but also, and this happened to me myself, and a lot of the audience of this show works in transformation efforts at some levels throughout the organization. Chief Transformation Officer, L&D, HR, lots of change levels. And sometimes I wondered how you spotted where they'd be undermined from above, where if they were successful, it would mean that this person loses some type of compensation, or that whole idea, if you're going to be cannibalized, make sure you're cannibalizing yourself. You did a lot of this in GE where you foresaw the future and you took actions today to make sure that you weren't the victim of this from some outsider. And I wondered how you handled that, or how did you see it? Because with your knowledge and your psychological safety to be able to pipe up to people like Jack Welch and go, hey man, that person is getting absolutely slaughtered because they're making change. How did you present that, and how did you manage that?
One of the things, again, people are welcome to it. I did it, and Jack didn't want to copyright any of this stuff. But the question was, if you were to do each of the actions described below, what would be the organization's likely reaction? And the choice was 1 would do, 1 or 2 would be approved, and 3 was nothing much would happen either way. Or 4th would be I would be punished, and 5 would be I don't have no idea what would happen. And 5 and 4 produce similar behavioral consequences because people are not that curious to see what's going to happen. Maybe the boss is going to yell at me one, he will. 4 and 5 produce the same kind of behaviors by the subordinate. I wouldn't do it if we were just talking through and kind of getting into that thing, and maybe we'd start with a positive and work our way. But when I went to do it with whole departments, or have my people do it, we would do it, or we call the pine tree, they go over, then I would basically do that survey. But the list of things would be the things that people are complaining about. And so what if you do each act is bring my boss unpleasant news, tell my boss is wrong when he thinks he's not. And the things I do, I'll let my subordinates take the credit for things done. And you can make it anonymous if you need to, because there's less ability to address it. But if it's firm-wide, doesn't matter who said it. And they would say, if I do that, my boss will get really attached, so soon I'm not doing my job, they'll start bringing stuff to my subordinate readily, I'm out of the loop. And again, it could be paranoid, but it could be
Shouldn't that just be the way always, that you have this candid culture where you can pipe up and you have to share bad news? Many of the case studies I've read and studied about innovation disruption, Nokia, for an example, Enron, what do you mentioned in the book, that people could not share bad news. They were absolutely slammed for it. They were absolutely destroyed for it. And if it was any way encroaching on, well, our behaviors are a little bit maybe touching illegal, then they were certainly slammed on those things.
No, you're absolutely right. Back to Skinner, it's called blaming the rat. That's where we started our talk. Well, Jack, you were a really scary person. He's noisy and he's right. Given he's noisy, it's good that he's right, but it's quite intimidating. And again, I just knew him in a different way. He didn't do that with me. And I had to buy machines. Said you put them on each desk. At 75 people in the lower level classes. And the left, if it's a yes, no, or for or against. And so I got them because Jack was just scared hell of people. So he would go through his shifts. Like, India, I got back. It's really exciting. What do you guys think about India? Great, Jack. Great. So I said, if you think, great, we got this thing, we pay for it. So humanity comes out, 30% people pay. We shouldn't invest in India.
Because it was anonymous.
Right. Just why it's up, it's 70%. Who said that? I said, Jack, the reason we bought those machines is so you don't know who said that.
I'm so glad you're sharing this, because there's so many people who work in small organizations where the founder's involved, a family business. People struggle from this all the time, and they end up becoming yes men and women. And you can't have an innovative culture when that's the case. You need to know bad news quickly. It's one of the reasons I think the book is so important, Steve. I think we'll probably leave it there, actually. And we're going to open the next day talking about, there's a great table about the dysfunctional behaviors that you have in an organization. We'll discuss the bullseye exercise, the blank sheet exercise that you talk about.
Yeah, that's how it flows. The bullseye is where you do the definition. Then you move over. You can use the clean sheet exercise if you want for measurement. And then, of course, we've already talked about some of the reward stuff. But do you think desirable things? What is the boss sick of seeing? Bad things. What does the boss want to see more of? Then you mix them up in a questionnaire. The question says that simply I'd be approved or rewarded. And the 5 says I'd be disapproved or punished. And 3 says there be no reaction of any kind. And for 1 is I don't know what would happen. And you can try to have some myth. If I were scared, I wouldn't do it either. Trust the people, make it safe, and verify. Reagan said that. The presidential level hidden, trust and verify.
Author of Reward Systems, Steve Kerr, thank you for joining us for part 1.
My pleasure.